The chance to host a Grand Prix doesn't come around every day. That's why people from Adelaide are angry at their government for not taking their chance to host the traveling motor show. So, how did the South Australian government blow their chance of getting the Grand Prix back? And how did a secret deal take the race away from Adelaide in the first place? Stay tuned to find out all that and more. First, let's talk about Australia. The Australian Grand Prix wasn't always in Melbourne. You might only recognize the Lake of Albert Park as the home to Australian Formula One, but it actually used to be held somewhere else. Between 1985 and 1995, the race was held in Adelaide, 400 miles away from Melbourne. And the track there was a street circuit that converted the roads of the Adelaide city centre into an exciting and difficult racetrack. The circuit had also hosted some historic moments in Formula One history. Ayrton Senna battled Alain Prost for the 1989 World Championship, and infamously, it was where Michael Schumacher crashed into the side of Damon Hill in 1994 to win his first title. But that would be the second last Formula One Grand Prix held at the circuit. The year before, it had been announced that the show was moving to Melbourne, and in fact, the deal between Formula One and the Melbourne government was made a secret after Adelaide hesitated to renew the contract. That was enough time for Melbourne representatives to jump on the opportunity, and they flew all the way to London to sign a contract with the head of F1, Bernie Ecclestone. The Victorian Premier, who led the takeover, said that it was hard to stay tight-lipped, but that was part of the agreement. And when they finally did announce it, people from Adelaide and South Australia were not happy. Newspapers and politicians were furious at how Melbourne had stolen the race from them. It was just the latest act of war in an old rivalry between the two cities. Apparently, there were even talks of putting up barricades and boycotting Victorian brands of beer. That's how you know it's serious if Australians are willing to stop drinking beer. Up next, Melbourne madness. Some people in Melbourne were just as furious as those in Adelaide. After the race was announced in 1994, thousands of people protested the race. Residents created a Save Albert Park group to obstruct the race and occupied construction buildings, burned flags, and organized outside Bernie Ecclestone's office in London. From the protests, there were nearly 700 arrests. But eventually, the opposition faded away, and all that was left was the racing. Melbourne became the first race on the calendar, and in doing so, became closely watched internationally. Each season, it was where new cars would be unveiled on the track, and teams would get first-hand knowledge about where they would be situated on the grid. New technology, innovations, and new drivers would have their first run at Albert Park. In 2014, when the hybrid era of engine power was introduced, it was Nico Rosberg's Mercedes that won by 26 seconds and heralded a new period of dominance for the German constructors. But last year in Bahrain, it was the opening year of the season, with Australia coming in third after Saudi Arabia. This definitely takes a bit of the shine off of the event and will be a factor in deciding whether or not the event continues. Despite its popularity, Melbourne's contract runs out in 2025, and Formula One has warned circuits that nowhere is safe. With the introduction of Miami and Las Vegas, we could see more events designed for Americans. If that's the case, then drivers and teams will miss the chance to travel down under to what has always been an exciting venue. Could the most infamous Australian be returning to his role as race director? And how did Adelaide miss an opportunity to reclaim the Australian Grand Prix? Don't go anywhere, because all that's coming right up. Now on to COVID opportunities. Adelaide had their only global event stolen by Melbourne, and they weren't about to forget it. That's why when an opportunity arose recently, they were still interested. As COVID-19 unfolded all over the world, it disrupted everything. Many sporting events were cancelled too, and the 2020 Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne became an international disaster when it was cancelled just hours before the first practice session was set to take place. It started with a McLaren staff member testing positive, and after a member of management also tested positive, a meeting decided that it shouldn't go ahead. And the following year, because of a high case of numbers in Melbourne, the race was again cancelled. It was terrible for Melburnian race fans, but it left an opportunity for Adelaideans. The South Australian government was urged to try and take this opportunity to bring the Grand Prix back to Adelaide. And in fact, one newspaper discovered that there was an offer officially made to the South Australian government, but it was actually rejected. Premier Stephen Marshall said that the logistics, organization, and investment required were just too much. And during a pandemic, they were not in any better position than Melbourne was to host the race. After they had cancelled the Adelaide 500 supercar race, the government promised that there would be replacements to make up for lost venue. Many were hoping that the Formula One race would be part of that, but it didn't turn out to be. Next up, Denny Rick. Australia has generally managed to keep at least one driver in Formula One. Throughout the 50s and 60s, it was three-time world champion Jack Brabham. And then throughout the 70s and 80s, it was another world champion, Alan Jones. And then there was a handful of drivers up until Mark Webber, who drove between 2002 and 2013, and handed the Red Bull baton to Daniel Ricciardo, who still drives today. And in fact, fact, after the Spanish Grand Prix, Ricciardo will break the record for the greatest number of races started by an Australian. It'll be his 216th Formula One race, and it's been an interesting journey. He started off at the Red Bull team after proving himself at Toro Rosso, but after pushing his teammate Sebastian Vettel out, he was himself pushed out by the younger prodigy Max Verstappen. He shocked the Formula One world by choosing him to switch to the uncompetitive Renault team, where he stayed just 2 seasons before jumping ship to McLaren. But there too, he struggled to make an impact against the rising talent of his teammate Lando Norris. He won a race last season, but still lost out in the Drivers' Championship to Lando, and this season has gotten off to a disastrous start. Ricciardo's highest finish was P6 at the Australian Grand Prix, while Lando managed a podium at the very next race. His star power is still big, and the Australian almost universally is loved by fans, but his performance has left many questioning whether or not his days in F1 are numbered. And now for a comeback. And speaking of Australians, there is some news about the most infamous Australian in motorsport, and he's not even a driver, but his name dominated headlines for months, and he was instrumental in one of those most controversial moments in Formula One. We're talking, of course, about Michael Masi. The former race director was fired from his post after an investigation into the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. His race was set to be an epic showdown between rivals Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who were on equal points after a bitterly fought season. It all came to a head when, in the last few laps, a safety car was called after Nicholas Latifi crashed. And when Michael Masi ordered that only selected cars could unlap themselves and that the safety car be called in early, he became the subject of harsh criticism for his unprecedented decision. But current FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem has said that Masi's removal from his job as race director wasn't the end of his career. Sulayem said that Masi had a personal overload and he made a mistake. He also said that Masi was still part of the organization and that he could still choose to use him for different roles in the future, and that they were never going to totally get rid of him, quote unquote. The structure of the race directing has changed for this season. Firstly, teams don't have direct contact with the race director, and so there's less personal pressure involved. But more importantly, the role is now split between 2 race directors, Eduardo Freitas and Niels Wittich, who rotate throughout the season. And in fact, the FIA has said that Michael Masi could be used as a 3rd race director. How many people does it take to do one job? What would you think about a possible Michael Masi return? And which tracks do you think should remain on the race calendar? Let us know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.